Sometimes the most extraordinary stories begin in the quietest places, on the side of an empty road beneath the hood of an old car, or in the eyes of a child you've never met. He was just a poor mechanic, tired from the day, ready to finish one more job. But when he saw the little girl sitting beside the Mustang, he came to fix. Everything changed, not because of what she said, but because of something she wore. And what followed was not what anyone could have expected. This isn't just a story about strangers crossing paths. It's about love rediscovered in the most unexpected way, the healing power of kindness, and how some people are meant to find each other, no matter how long it takes. Before we begin, if you believe in second chances and stories that touch the heart and leave you with hope, consider subscribing to our channel. We share emotional healing stories that stay with you long after they end. Now settle in. Let me tell you what really happened. A poor mechanic helped a little girl beside the Mustang. He was fixing, then froze when he saw the ring on her finger. The autumn wind swept down Main Street like it had a memory to chase Jack. Miles leaned under the rusted hood of a '92 pickup, his hands black with grease, his back aching from hours on his feet. The smell of motor oil and cold coffee filled the small garage, along with the quiet rhythm of a man who had long ago stopped expecting his days to change. At 51, Jack's life had settled into a rhythm that was part habit, part survival. He woke at 6, fed the stray cat that never left, drank his coffee black and bitter, and worked until the shadows of the setting sun stretched across the cracked concrete floor. Since Lila passed, nothing had shifted, not the radio station he kept on. Not the faded flannel shirts, not even the battered coffee mug with a missing handle she once gave him for Valentine's. So when the call came in, a Mustang stalled by the side of the road near Willow Creek. He didn't ask questions. He wiped his hands, grabbed his tools, and drove his rust-colored tow truck out into the wind. The car was easy to spot, a powder blue 1967 Mustang parked awkwardly off the shoulder, its nose pointing slightly toward the tree line. But what made Jack slow wasn't the car. It was the sight of a little girl sitting cross-legged in the yellowing grass beside it. She looked no older than 6, wearing a white dress with lace trim that didn't belong anywhere near an engine block. Her shoes were dusty, and she clutched a well-worn stuffed rabbit in her lap. Her blonde curls framed a pale, serious face that didn't quite match her age. Jack pulled over, killed the engine, and stepped out slowly. "Hey there, kiddo," he said gently. "You okay?" The girl looked up at him with wide, steady eyes. "My mommy's on the phone." She said not to move. Jack scanned the area. No adults. No phone in the girl's hand, just the sound of birds and the ticking engine cooling off. He crouched down beside her, careful not to startle. "Where is she now?" The girl pointed vaguely toward the woods over there. Maybe something tightened in Jack's chest. The sun was dropping fast and the road was quiet, too quiet for a child to be sitting here alone. He glanced at the Mustang, a beautiful car restored with care. Whoever drove it had money and taste. The hood was up, the keys on the seat. "Odd. You hungry?" Jack asked, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a wrapped granola bar. "Don't tell your mom I gave you one before dinner." The girl took it with a small, polite nod. "Thank you, sir." Sir Jack exhaled a half laugh. He hadn't been called that in a long time. "What's your name?" he asked Ella. She said through a mouthful of granola. "What's yours, Jack?" "Like in the stories?" she asked, suddenly curious. "Like Jack and the Beanstalk." He smiled, not quite, more like Jack and the broken alternator. She giggled. It was small but real, and something inside Jack warmed a notch. He stood and leaned under the Mustang's hood. Alternator belt was loose. Fixable. As he reached for a wrench, something glittered in the corner of his vision. Ella had set down her stuffed rabbit to eat. On her small left hand was a silver ring, delicate, old-fashioned. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He stepped closer, slowly. "Ella," he said softly, "that ring. Can I see it?" She lifted her hand innocently. It wasn't just similar. It was the ring, a slender silver band with a tiny blue sapphire and a faint engraving on the inside. "Forever, Jack and Lila." The words had faded over time, but he knew them like he knew his own name. He had the twin of it at home, in a velvet box he hadn't opened in years. Jack staggered back a step. His pulse thudded in his ears. His world tilted, not from grief this time, but from a sudden electric sense of something unfinished returning. "Where did you get that?" he asked, voice quieter now, but shaking. Ella looked down. "It's mine," she said simply. "Mommy gave it to me. She said it's special." Jack swallowed hard. Did, did she say where it came from? Ella shook her head. "No, but sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping, she cries when she looks at it." Jack was silent. There were explanations, coincidences, rings get copied, styles repeat. But deep down in the marrow of his bones, he knew. That ring had been buried with Lila. He had placed it on her finger himself before the lid closed. There was no doubt, and yet here it was, on the finger of a little girl who shouldn't exist, at least not in his world. His world, it seemed, had just cracked open. A car door slammed behind him. Jack turned sharply. A tall woman in a cream-colored coat approached briskly from a sleek black SUV that had pulled up without him hearing. Her heels crunched the gravel, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. Her eyes were sharp and commanding until they fell on Ella, and then softened. "There you are," she said, relieved. "Sweetheart, I told you to stay in the car." Ella looked sheepish. "Sorry, Mommy." The woman turned to Jack. "I hope she wasn't bothering you." Jack stood still, every instinct in him on alert. "No, not at all." The woman extended a manicured hand. "I'm Catherine Vale." Jack took her hand, his grip automatic. "Jack Miles." Catherine glanced at the Mustang. "Beautiful, isn't it? It was my father's thought I'd surprise Ella with a picnic and a ride. Guess I misjudged how reliable it is. She's got a loose belt." Jack muttered, "I can tighten it, but she'll need a better tune-up soon." "Appreciate it," she said distractedly. Then as she reached for Ella's hand, she paused. Her gaze dropped to the ring. Jack watched closely. Catherine's face flickered just a second, but Jack saw it. The recognition, the hesitation, the emotion. But then it was gone. "That old thing," she said lightly. "Ella found it in a box of antique jewelry I bought years ago. She insisted on wearing it today." "Sentimental girl." Jack didn't respond, because now he knew and she did too. But neither of them said a word more. Jack didn't say another word as Catherine and Ella climbed into the back seat of the black SUV. The door shut with a gentle thunk, and for a moment Jack stood on the side of the road, watching their taillights disappear into the dusky veil of approaching night. The wind kicked up again, colder now, a whisper through the trees. He turned back to the Mustang and stared at the empty spot where Ella had been sitting just minutes ago. The image of the ring, his Lila's ring, on that child's tiny hand, wouldn't leave his mind. It burned behind his eyes like an afterimage from staring at the sun. There had to be an explanation, a rational one. But when he slid back behind the wheel of his truck and started the engine, that old feeling crept in. The one he thought he'd buried with Lila. The one that whispered, maybe life wasn't done. Surprising him. Jack didn't sleep that night. He sat in his armchair by the window, the old cat purring softly on the windowsill. His thoughts pacing faster than the wind outside. On the table beside him lay an old velvet box. He hadn't touched it in years. Now, hands slightly trembling, he opened it. Inside, the twin to Ella's ring sat nestled against faded blue satin, silver slender, with a sapphire so small it almost didn't catch the light. But the engraving, forever. Jack and Lila, was unmistakable. He held it under the lamp, comparing the weight in his hand to the memory of the ring on Ella's finger. Identical, impossible. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed. Lila had never said anything about being pregnant. In those final months, she'd been tired, quiet, fighting pain she didn't want to name. But would she have hidden something that monumental? His gut said no. His heart wasn't so sure. The next morning, Jack returned to the garage, but the tools felt heavier in his hands. The trucks were the same, the engines, the oil stains, the dented lockers, all unchanged. But his world had shifted, and now everything around him seemed like it was standing still. Around noon, a sleek silver car pulled into the lot, too clean, too polished for this place. Jack stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag as the tinted window slid down Catherine. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but her voice was steady. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Jack gestured toward the bench outside the shop. She stepped out, impeccably dressed again, though her heels hesitated slightly on the gravel. They sat. She didn't speak right away. The hum of a nearby lawnmower and the faint sound of a dog barking in the distance filled the silence. Finally, she said, "Ella hasn't stopped talking about you." Jack smiled faintly. "She's a sweet kid." "She's special," Catherine said slowly. "She's all I have." There was something behind her words, a weight. Jack turned to her. "I need to ask, that ring, where did it really come from?" Catherine looked at him, and for a long moment she didn't answer. Then she pulled off her sunglasses, revealing tired eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. "I wasn't expecting this," she said softly. "Any of it." Jack's jaw tightened. "It's not just a ring. I gave that to my wife 24 years ago. She passed. 6 years back, I watched them bury it with her." Catherine turned away. Her voice dropped. "I bought it at an estate auction 5 years ago. It was in a sealed envelope with some handwritten letters. I didn't read them. I only kept a few pieces. That one because Ella clung to it." Jack stared. "An estate auction?" She nodded. "In Chicago, private, small. I thought they were antique odds and ends." Something in her tone said she wasn't lying, but she also wasn't telling everything. Jack exhaled through his nose. "Was Ella adopted?" Catherine stiffened just slightly. "That's not a casual question. I'm not asking casually." Silence again. This one longer. More loaded. "Yes," she said at last. "She came to us when she was 3 months old, through a private agency in Illinois. I never met the birth mother. My ex-husband handled everything. I wasn't in a good place then. We'd been trying for years." Jack felt like the air had thinned. "I need to know who her mother was." He said, "I need to see that paperwork." "I don't know if I can do that." Catherine said, "Legally, ethically, I'm not here to take her." Jack interrupted, his voice firm but quiet. "I'm not claiming anything. But if that little girl is connected to someone, I lost someone who meant everything. I need to understand how." Catherine looked at him. Really looked. Her eyes softened and the tension in her shoulders eased just a bit. "I don't want to hurt her," Jack added, voice thick now. "Or you. I just need the truth. That's all I've got left." She nodded slowly. "I'll check what I have. If there's anything, I'll let you know." Jack stood, and so did she. He extended a hand, not as a threat, not as a deal, just as one human reaching out to another. Catherine hesitated, then shook it. As she turned to leave, she paused. "For what it's worth," she said, "when Ella wore that ring, I thought it was strange how peaceful she looked, as if it belonged on her hand. Like it always had." She got into the car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving Jack standing alone, wine tugging at his flannel, a lifetime's worth of questions starting to surface. And somewhere deep inside, something else stirred. Not just pain, not just confusion. Hope. The following weekend arrived, ushered in by a gray sky that hung low over the town like a heavy memory. Jack's garage was quiet. No customers, no phone calls, just the faint tapping of rain on the tin roof and the tick of the wall clock marking time he couldn't seem to fill. The velvet ring box sat on the workbench beside him. He hadn't brought it from the house to admire it. He brought it because he couldn't stop staring at the identical ring on Ella's hand in his mind, and now he needed the original in front of him to compare. To be certain he wasn't slipping into some desperate fantasy. But it wasn't fantasy. He knew this ring. Every scratch, every curve of that hand-carved engraving. He'd put it on Lila's finger 25 years ago, when they were both broke and stupidly in love, sitting in the back of his first pickup under a blanket of Kansas stars. She had cried when she saw it, not because it was valuable, but because it was him. He ran a thumb over the words inside: "Forever, Jack and Lila." No one else would have a ring like that, and no one else would have had a reason to pass it down unless... Jack stood up suddenly. The answer wasn't in his shop, and it wasn't in his memory. It was in the part of Lila's life he hadn't been allowed to witness, the part that had happened in the final months when she pushed him away under the guise of protecting him. He'd never fought her on that. Maybe he should have. By mid-afternoon, Jack found himself parked in front of the old medical clinic on Hillcrest Avenue. It had been nearly 7 years since he last stepped through its doors, the day he picked up Lila's final test results. The receptionist was new, probably no older than 25, with her earbuds still dangling, when she looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" "I'm trying to locate records," Jack said, clearing his throat. "From a patient named Lila Miles. She passed in 2018. The receptionist's fingers tapped at her keyboard. I'm sorry, records that old are archived. I'm not asking for treatment records, Jack said. I'm asking if you can tell me who treated her at the time. Any staff who might still be around. She hesitated 1 second. After a few phone calls and an awkward wait in the corner lobby, a thin woman in her late 60s appeared. Her name tag read, L. Danner, RN, retired. The moment Jack saw her, something clicked. He remembered her. She'd been there on Lila's last day, one of the few faces that didn't look away when he came to pick up her things. I remember your wife, Nurse Danner said, as they sat in a side office. She was quiet, strong, wrote poetry on scrap paper in the waiting room. Jack nodded. She left for 3 weeks, said she was visiting family, but when she came back, she was different, weaker, distant. She told me not to ask, Danner leaned back. She didn't go to family, she went to a hospice program, one that specialized in maternity cases. Jack's throat dried. She was pregnant. Yes, Danner said quietly. It wasn't unusual for women in her situation to conceal it, especially if they knew their time was short. Some wanted to spare their partners the pain. Others didn't want to burden their child with guilt. He stared at her. She gave birth, Danner nodded. A baby girl. I wasn't present, but I know she left instructions for adoption through a private intermediary. Everything was sealed. Jack sat in silence, absorbing the blow like a mechanic watching a car hood slam shut without warning. Why didn't anyone tell me? He asked, voice hoarse. She left specific wishes, the nurse replied. You weren't to be contacted. We follow the law, and more than that, we honor the dying's final requests. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The pieces were clicking into place too fast and yet still too slowly to make sense of it all. So that baby, that girl, could be she would be about 6 now, the nurse said gently. I'm sorry, Jack. I truly am. He nodded, hollow inside. Did Lila leave anything? He asked. A letter? A note. The nurse hesitated, then stood and crossed the room to a small locked cabinet. She returned with a slim manila envelope yellowed at the corners. We were supposed to destroy unclaimed personal effects after 5 years. I don't know why I kept this. Something in me thought it mattered. Jack took it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakable. Jack, for someday, love, L. He didn't open it until he was back at the garage. The shop was dark now except for the orange pool of light under the desk lamp. He unfolded the single sheet inside. My Jack. If you're reading this, it means someday finally came. I didn't want to leave you with more pain. You were already carrying so much. But there was a girl, a small, unexpected miracle that came when I was almost gone. I wasn't strong enough to raise her. And I couldn't bear to leave her with you only to make you watch me disappear. So I chose what I thought would hurt you less. Her name is Ella. If life is kind, maybe you'll find her. Maybe she'll find you. If that happens, don't be afraid. Just love her. She'll recognize your heart. It's where she came from forever. Lila. Jack didn't cry. He just sat there still and quiet while the night thickened outside and the clock on the wall ticked forward 1 second at a time. Lila was gone, but her legacy had a name and a face and a silver ring on a small finger. He closed the letter and pressed it to his chest. The past hadn't returned to haunt him. It had come back to be healed. Jack didn't sleep that night either. The letter lay folded on the nightstand, but its contents refused to stay there. They lived behind his eyes now, echoing through every corner of the quiet house, filling the silence Lila had left behind. Her words, there was a girl. Maybe you'll find her. Just love her, looped like a whispering breeze across an old field, constant and low. And Ella, the child he never knew existed, the child now living just a few miles from him. Jack rose before dawn. The sky was still dark when he stepped outside, the cold biting at his cheeks as he started the engine of his truck. He didn't know exactly where he was going, only that he couldn't sit still another moment. He needed answers. Proof, a thread to follow that would make all this more than a feeling in his chest and a child's face in his memory. The only person he could think of was Rob Templeton. Rob had been Lila's cousin. They were close growing up, and Jack remembered Rob visiting her once or twice near the end, bringing groceries, books, and soft conversation, When Lila no longer had the strength to argue Jack hadn't seen him since the funeral. But Rob had worked in city administration for years, human services, if Jack remembered right. If anyone might have known what Lila was going through in those missing weeks, or had any clue about the adoption, it was him. Rob still lived in the same one-story brick house near Sycamore Street. His front yard was overgrown, but the flag on the porch still flew. Jack parked on the curb and stepped out, clutching the envelope Lila had left him, like it was something alive. Rob answered the door in a bathrobe, hair thinning and gray, now blinking like a man who hadn't expected a knock before coffee. Jack, he said, rubbing his eyes. Well, damn, it's been what? 6 years. Jack nodded. Can I come in? Rob stepped aside without hesitation. They sat in the kitchen, 2 steaming mugs between them, the old wall clock ticking in the background, like it had in every memory Jack had of this place. I'll cut to it. Jack said, his voice low but clear. I know Lila gave birth. I know she kept it from me. Rob's expression didn't shift, but something behind his eyes faltered. Jack laid the envelope on the table. I have her letter. I know the baby was a girl. I think her name is Ella. Rob looked away. I didn't think you'd ever find out. That makes 2 of us. Silence sat heavy between them. Finally, Rob spoke. She told me the cancer was spreading fast. The doctors said she had maybe 2 months left. 3 if she was lucky. But then she found out she was pregnant. No one could believe it. The chemo, they didn't think it was possible. Jack swallowed hard. She didn't want to tell you, Rob continued. She said you'd give up everything for her and the baby. She didn't want that. Said the guilt would kill her faster than the cancer. She didn't even give me the chance. Jack muttered, his voice raw. Rob nodded. I know I tried to change her mind. I offered to help. But Lila was stubborn when she was scared. You know that. Jack stared at his mug. Where did she go? There's a place. It's not listed publicly. A private hospice adoption clinic outside of Joliet. They take in terminal mothers who want to deliver safely and place the child in adoption before passing anonymous placements. No state involvement. All private. Jack's jaw tightened. Do you remember the name Riverbend? Haven. Jack nodded slowly, his thoughts spinning. And she gave the baby up there. Yes, Rob said. She chose everything through an agency liaison. Left no contact info. She wouldn't even tell me the name she picked for the baby. Said it would hurt less if we didn't know. Jack looked up. You think she regretted it? Rob didn't answer immediately. I think she hoped time would bury it. That your life would go on. But I also think that ring she had, the one she wore even in the hospital, meant she never really let go. Jack nodded slowly. He stood gripping the envelope again, like a compass. Thank you, Rob. Jack, Rob said gently as he walked him to the door. If you found that girl, if Ella really is. She is, Jack said, his voice steady now. I saw it in her eyes. That evening, Jack returned home and stood in front of the bathroom mirror. Longer than he had in years. His reflection had aged. The lines around his eyes were deeper, the graying in his beard more pronounced. But behind it all was the same man who once held Lila's hand in the middle of the night and promised he'd never let her face anything alone. He couldn't change the past, but he could be part of what came next. He picked up his phone thumb, hesitating over the screen, before pressing the call icon next to a name he hadn't saved until 2 days ago. Catherine Vale. The line rang once. Twice. She picked up. Mr. Miles, Jack, he corrected. Please. There was a pause on the line. I found the letter, he said. Another pause. You're sure? Then yes. Lila was Ella's mother. She gave birth at a place called Riverbend Haven. Everything matches. The ring, the name, her handwriting. All of it. Catherine didn't speak for a long moment. When she did, her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it. She never told you? No, she thought it would protect me. Catherine exhaled. I'll be honest, Jack, I don't know what to do with this. Neither do I, he said. But I'm not here to tear anything apart. Ella has a life. She has a mother. I'm not trying to take that away, I know, she said softly. I just want to be part of her world, he added. Whatever that looks like. If you'll let me. There was silence again, but it wasn't cold. It was the kind of pause that came when someone is thinking about something bigger than themselves. Finally, Catherine said, Ella's been asking when she'll see you again. Jack smiled, something warm flickering behind his ribs. I'd like that he said, then come by Sunday noon. We're making apple pie. And then she hung up. Jack stared at the phone for a moment, the quiet returning like a gentle wave. He had found the missing weeks, and in them a daughter and perhaps a new beginning. Sunday arrived with a clear autumn sky, brilliant blue stretching endlessly over rust-colored trees and sunlit rooftops. Jack stood outside Catherine Vale's estate, hands tucked into the pockets of his best and only blazer heart, pacing like an engine with a sputtering belt. He had no idea what he was walking into. The house sat on a hill that overlooked the town's north end, grand, but not showy. Ivy curled up white brick and tall windows gleamed in the late morning light. It was the kind of house people in Jack's part of town would slow their cars to admire just for a second before driving on. But Jack wasn't just admiring. He was stepping up to the door. He knocked, then stepped back. The door opened faster than he expected. Ella beamed. She wore a yellow sundress and purple socks that didn't match. You're here. Jack's throat tightened. Hey, kiddo. Before he could say more, she threw her arms around his waist. Jack froze for a second, unsure what to do with his hands, then slowly, gently placed one on her back. Catherine's voice came from the doorway behind her. Ella, sweetheart, let Jack come inside before you knock him over. Ella stepped back, grinning. Come in, Mommy made pie, but she won't let me touch the oven. I can't imagine why, Jack said with a smile, following them in. The house was warm and filled with natural light. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the scent of cinnamon and apple hung in the air. Everything was elegant, tasteful too, refined for someone like him, and yet it didn't feel cold. Catherine emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She wore dark jeans and a cream sweater, her hair in a loose braid face, makeup-free for the first time Jack had seen. Hi, she said, her voice carefully casual. Hi, Jack replied, matching her tone. There was a beat of silence before Catherine nodded toward the kitchen. Coffee'd be great. She disappeared through the archway, and Jack found himself alone with Ella again. She grabbed his hand without hesitation. Come see my art corner. Jack let himself be led into a sunroom where a small wooden table was covered with crayons, markers, glitter glue, and a dozen lopsided drawings taped to the window glass. This one's me and Mommy, she said, pointing to a picture of two stick figures with giant heads and sparkly dresses. And this one's Mr. Bunny. And this... She held up a drawing with three figures this time, one tall, one medium, and one small, all holding hands beneath a tree. This one's us, Jack blinked. His figure had a hat and a beard. Ella's detail work was impressive. You drew me, of course, she said. Mommy said you might be special. Jack chuckled softly. She say that, but don't tell her I told you. He knelt beside her, touched by the quiet certainty in her eyes. It's our secret. Catherine returned then, carrying 2 mugs and a plate of warm apple pie. Her gaze drifted from the picture to Jack's face, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. You've got a talented artist on your hands, Jack said, accepting the mug. She's got a mind of her own, Catherine replied, half smiling. I'm just trying to keep up. They sat at the breakfast nook, Ella between them, chattering as she ate pie and told stories about kindergarten, a lizard she'd seen at the park, and a classmate named Kenny who eats crayons when he's nervous. Jack laughed more in that hour than he had in the past 6 years. Still, every moment felt like walking a tightrope. He sensed Catherine watching, measuring, weighing, not out of suspicion, but out of a mother's instinct to protect. When Ella ran off to her room to get a toy, Jack leaned back and sipped his coffee. Thank you, he said, for the coffee. For letting me come. Catherine's expression softened. It wasn't easy. Not because of you, but because of what it means. I understand. She's everything to me, Catherine said quietly. She came into my life at a time when I thought I was beyond hope. My husband had left. I was told I couldn't have children. And then Ella appeared. She saved me. Jack nodded slowly, and she saved me too. I just didn't know it until now. Catherine looked down her thumb, tracing the rim of her coffee mug. I keep thinking about that ring, about how you recognized it so quickly. I made it myself, Jack said. Took me 3 months of working night shifts to pay for it, had it engraved at a shop 2 towns over. There's not another one like it. Catherine's gaze lifted to meet his. I believe you? Jack didn't speak for a moment. I'm not here to undo her life, Catherine. I know she's your daughter in every way that counts. But if I can be a part of her world, even just a small part, she already drew you into it, Catherine said softly. She doesn't know why she feels connected to you. But she does. She's got her mother's eyes, Jack said. The way Lila used to look at me when I said something ridiculous, Catherine studied him. You still love her? Yes, Jack said, but not the way I used to. Loving Lila was a chapter, Ella. She's a new one. I'm still figuring out what it means. They sat in silence, not awkward, but reflective. When Ella came bounding back with a stuffed giraffe named Buttons, she crawled up into Jack's lap without hesitation. He froze again, unsure, but Catherine simply nodded. Tell him the Buttons story, she said. Ella grinned. Okay, so Buttons used to be afraid of the dark? And Jack listened. To the story, to the rhythm of a child's voice, to the sounds of a home that somehow didn't feel foreign anymore. He had once thought his life ended with Lila's. But now in this room filled with light and apple pie and purple socks, he realized it had only been waiting to begin again. Catherine Vale stood in the doorway of Ella's bedroom, watching her daughter sleep. The little girl was curled around her stuffed giraffe, a tangle of golden curls and mismatched pajamas, one sock dangling halfway off her foot. Her breathing was slow and steady, the innocent rhythm of someone whose world still felt whole. Catherine's didn't. She closed the door gently and walked down the hall, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floors. The house was still lit only by the soft glow of sconces along the walls. In the kitchen, a half-finished glass of wine waited on the counter next to the pie tin from earlier that day. She didn't touch it. Instead, she pulled a worn leather file from the drawer below the sink. It was locked, not for secrecy, but for control. There were things in there she had tried to forget. Files from the adoption agency, legal documents, birth records that bore no names she knew, and photographs, two of them, of a pale woman with hollow cheeks holding a swaddled baby in a sterile room. The woman was Lila. At the time, Catherine hadn't known who she was. The agency had provided only minimal information: terminal illness, private surrender, no known relatives willing to claim the child. She looked fragile but serene, like someone who had accepted something impossible. Catherine remembered holding that first picture in her hands and thinking, she looks like she's already said goodbye. Now she knew why. She set the photo down beside the wine glass and sat at the table. The weight of the day pressing against her shoulders, Jack's visit had stirred more than memories. It had stirred fears she hadn't let herself name: fear of losing Ella, fear of not being enough, fear that everything she'd built, the quiet, careful life they shared, might collapse under the weight of a truth she couldn't control. She had worked so hard to create a life for Ella filled with stability and love. From the moment she brought her home, Catherine had known it would take more than lullabies and preschool tuition to mend the cracks in her own heart. But Ella had done it without effort, without even knowing. She had healed Catherine in places she didn't know were broken. And now the past had returned. Not as a threat exactly, but as a mirror. One she wasn't sure she was ready to look into. She took a sip of wine, then stood and walked to the fire where Jack had sat earlier, sipping coffee and laughing at Ella's story about the crayon-eating classmate. He had fit in so naturally it scared her. The way Ella had climbed into his lap, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at him. It wasn't something Catherine had taught her. It was something instinctive. The ring had been a clue, yes, but the real truth was written in Ella's eyes when Jack walked into the room. Recognition, comfort, trust, and Jack. He hadn't asked for anything. Not custody, not rights, not drama. Just to be there, to be a presence. A witness to the miracle he hadn't known was his. Catherine sighed. She had spent so much of her life building barriers, elegant, respectable, ironclad walls that kept her from heartbreak. Even her marriage had been more of a contract than a connection. When it fell apart, she had barely grieved, only redirected, built tighter walls. But now Jack was sitting on the other side of them, not trying to knock them down, just waiting. Steady, honest, and that terrified her even more, because part of her wanted to let him in. The next day, Catherine called in late to her office, and instead drove down to the county archives. She needed more than a gut feeling. She needed to see if the threads connected clearly, legally, chronologically, emotionally. The clerk at the desk was polite but impatient, tapping at her keyboard with practiced speed. "Do you have a date or a name?" she asked. Catherine nodded. June 2018, the name was Lila Miles. She died shortly after childbirth. "I'm trying to confirm something about a private hospice called Riverbend Haven." The clerk looked up. "Not many requests for that place. It was closed 2 years ago. Closed funding dried up. Private donors stopped supporting it. We have some digital records, but no full documentation." Catherine handed over the case number from Ella's sealed adoption file, along with a court document she never thought she'd have reason to revisit. The clerk scanned, tapped, and frowned. "Interesting. What? Well, this birth record has a matching case file, but there's a discrepancy on the paternity line." It was left blank. Catherine nodded. "The birth mother didn't disclose." "Right, but there's also a note. Something handwritten. It's unusual." The woman swiveled the screen toward her. In faded cursive, below the printed lines were the words, "Father unknown. If life leads him here someday, tell him just love her." Well, Catherine blinked. It was the same handwriting Jack had shown her on the letter, same phrasing, same heart behind the words. And suddenly all her doubts didn't matter. That evening, when Ella had gone to sleep, Catherine sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She stared at her email inbox for a long time before typing a message. Subject: "Thank you, Jack. I went looking today, not because I didn't believe you, but because I needed to see it for myself, and I did. She was yours, Jack. Yours and Lila's, and now she's mine too. I don't know how we navigate this, how we build something that isn't built out of pain or fear, but I do know this Ella deserves a family that includes all the people who love her. Let's figure it out, Catherine." She hit send outside. The wind picked up again, sweeping leaves against the glass like 1,000 tiny hands trying to get her attention. But this time, Catherine didn't flinch. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and let the stillness settle. Not as a threat, but as a promise. Something new was beginning. It was a golden Saturday afternoon when Jack arrived at the park. He'd never spent much time in this part of town. The trees were older here, taller, their branches casting dappled shade over winding paths and wrought iron benches. A duck pond glimmered at the far end of the green, and children's laughter floated from the nearby playground, like music carried on the wind. Jack spotted them easily. Ella was in motion, arms outstretched, running like the wind in her flower-printed dress, her hair bouncing behind her. Catherine stood nearby, leaning against a tree with a takeout coffee in hand, her gaze following Ella, with a protective softness Jack was beginning to recognize. He approached slowly, not wanting to disrupt the peace of it all. Catherine turned when she saw him and offered a small, genuine smile. "You're right on time. I wasn't sure if this was more of a 10 minutes late is charming kind of situation." "Only if you're bringing croissants," she replied dryly. Jack held up a paper bag. "Lucky guess." She raised an eyebrow, then chuckled. "Ella's going to love you even more now." He looked toward the little girl who was attempting to balance on the edge of the sandbox, her arms still spread like wings. "She's fearless," he said. "She is?" Catherine agreed, "but she's also watching." Jack turned to her. "She watches you," Catherine continued, her voice lower now. "Not just when you're near her, but when you're not looking. It's like she's trying to understand how someone she barely knows can feel so familiar." Jack's throat tightened. "Because I feel it too," Catherine added almost in a whisper. They stood in silence for a beat before Ella spotted them and ran full speed toward Jack. "Uncle Jack," she squealed. He dropped to one knee just in time to catch her in a full-body hug. She smelled like grass and crayons, and he couldn't help but laugh as she looked up at him with flushed cheeks and shining eyes. "I made a daisy chain," she announced, pulling a slightly crooked flower crown from her shoulder bag. "It's for you." Jack took it with reverence. "You know, I've never worn one of these before." "Well, now you have to. It's the law." Jack placed the crown gently on his head, and Ella clapped satisfied. Catherine laughed, a sound that surprised even her. They spent the next hour walking the paths, Ella skipping between them, holding one hand from each adult. Jack told silly stories about squirrels who ran used car lots in the woods. Catherine joined in, adding details about raccoons that bartered using shiny objects and acorns. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It was easy. After they stopped for ice cream, Catherine stepped away to take a phone call, and Jack found himself sitting beside Ella on a bench overlooking the duck pond. She licked her cone slowly, then turned to him with serious eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you sad a lot, Jack?" Blinked surprised. "What makes you ask that?" "Sometimes you smile with your mouth," she said, "but your eyes look like rainy windows." He exhaled softly. "That's pretty smart for someone who just got bubblegum ice cream on her nose." She grinned, wiped her face, and waited. Jack looked out over the water. "I used to be sad all the time," he said honestly, "because someone I loved very much had to go away, and I thought I'd never feel better again." Ella was quiet, absorbing. "But then I met a little girl," Jack continued, "who reminded me that some people don't go away forever. Sometimes they leave behind gifts we didn't expect." Ella tilted her head. "Like me," Jack turned to her, his voice thick, "exactly like you." She took his hand. "I'm glad you're not sad today." "Me too," he said. Catherine returned a few minutes later, sliding her phone into her bag. Her eyes flicked from Ella's hand in Jack's to the look on his face, and something inside her shifted. Later, they walked back toward the parking lot. Ella ran ahead to chase a butterfly, and Jack slowed his steps beside Catherine. "You're good with her," she said. "I've had zero practice," he replied. "Turns out it's not that hard when the kid's made of magic." Catherine looked at him. "She thinks the same about you." He hesitated, then said, "Thank you for letting me be part of this." "You don't need to thank me, Jack. You're part of her whether I let you or not. She made that decision before either of us did." He nodded. They reached the cars, and Jack opened the back door of Catherine's SUV so Ella could climb in. "Can we do this again soon?" the little girl asked. Pulling her seatbelt across, Jack looked to Catherine. She smiled. "Absolutely." He closed the door gently and watched them drive away, Ella waving from the back window until they disappeared around the curve. For a long moment, Jack stood in the sunlit parking lot, daisy crowns still on his head, and breathed in the scent of cut grass and possibility. The world had taken so much from him, but today it had given something back. Not just a child, not just a connection, but hope. Real, unshakable, hard-earned hope. The week that followed should have brought peace. Instead, it brought questions. Catherine found herself lying awake most nights, the soft tick of the hallway clock echoing through the house like a whisper too loud to ignore. She would stare at the ceiling while shadows from the oak tree outside painted shifting patterns on her bedroom wall. Jack had become a presence, not daily, not invasive, but steady. A check-in text. A shared story from Ella about their duck pond adventures. A photo of the daisy crown now sitting proudly on Jack's workbench beside a tiny pink screwdriver Ella insisted he might need for emergencies. It was by every definition going well, and that's what frightened her. She wasn't used to things going well. On Thursday afternoon, Catherine sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open but ignored. A spreadsheet blinked in the background, quarterly revenue. A client contract awaited her signature. But her mind kept drifting back to that moment in the park, watching Jack walk beside Ella as if he'd always been there. She trusted him, that was the problem, because trust she had learned came with risk, and risk often came wrapped in comfort, wearing the face of someone you wanted to believe in. She reached for her coffee, then froze. Ella was sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the dining table, her little brow furrowed, crayons scattered everywhere. "What are you drawing?" Catherine asked. "A family." Ella said. Catherine stood and stepped over. The drawing was simple but unmistakable three-stick figures. One tall woman with brown hair, one man with a cap, and a small girl between them holding both hands. Beneath it in blocky crayon letters were the words, "My real family." Catherine's chest tightened. "Ella," she said, gently kneeling beside her. "What do you mean by real?" Ella looked up, confused by the question. "Us, you, me, and Uncle Jack, like the park day." "That was real," Catherine forced a smile. "It was very real, sweetheart," but her stomach nodded. What did this mean? Was she being replaced in Ella's heart? Was Jack becoming something more than just a gentle figure from the sidelines? Was she opening a door she couldn't close again? And if she was that a bad thing? She didn't know anymore. That night, Catherine sat alone on the back patio, a wool blanket wrapped around her shoulders as the autumn breeze rustled the trees. She held a cup of tea untouched. Her phone sat beside her, lit up with Jack's name. She had texted earlier, Let's meet for coffee. Just us now, she waited at precisely 7-mile-1 headlights swept across the driveway. A moment later, Jack stepped onto the patio dressed in his usual flannel and worn boots, but clean-shaven and hesitant. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat silent for a beat. Everything okay? Yes, she said, and no. Jack's brow furrowed slightly. Talk to me. Catherine didn't answer immediately. She looked out at the dark yard, the way the wind moved through the grass like waves. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet. I've always had control, Jack. My life, my business, Ella's world. I built it brick by brick after it all fell apart. I understand, he said simply. And now, I'm terrified that if I let you too close, I'll lose that control. That I'll lose her. Jack nodded, absorbing her words without judgment. I see the way she looks at you. Catherine went on. Like she's known you forever. And I don't want to be pushed out of the center of her world. You won't be, Jack said. There's enough room in her heart for both of us. I'm not here to replace you. She called us her real family, Catherine whispered. Do you know what that did to me? Jack leaned forward. She didn't mean it to hurt you. She meant it to tell you she's happy, that she feels safe. Catherine looked at him, then eyes wet. I've spent 6 years building that safety, and you did it beautifully, Jack said. You gave her a life full of love. I'm not here to take credit for that. I'm just here because fate saw fit to cross our paths, and I'd be a fool not to honor that. Silence settled between them again. Not heavy this time, but fragile. Catherine finally broke it. I don't know how to do this. Neither do I, Jack said. But I think we can figure it out. She looked down at her hands clenched in her lap. Jack reached across the table slowly and placed his hand over hers. He didn't squeeze. He didn't assume, he just stayed there, still and solid. And for once, Catherine didn't pull away. Later, after Jack had left, Catherine tiptoed into Ella's room. The girl was curled beneath her pink comforter, hugging buttons. The giraffe breathing softly. Catherine sat at the edge of the bed and brushed a curl from her daughter's cheek. You're not mine by blood, she whispered, but you are mine in every way that counts. She paused, and Jack is yours too. Saying it aloud felt like surrender, but also like grace. She kissed Ella's forehead and stood glancing once more at the child who had taught her what it meant to belong, not through possession, but through love. As she closed the door behind her, Catherine realized something important. She hadn't lost her place in Ella's world. She had simply been invited to share it. It rained on Wednesday, not the wild, stormy kind, but a soft, persistent drizzle that made the whole town feel like it was wrapped in a sigh. Jack's garage was quiet that afternoon, save for the steady drip of water outside and the occasional buzz of his socket wrench as he worked on a rusted Buick in the far bay. But even with the hood up and the radio on, his thoughts weren't under the car. They were across town with a 6-year-old girl who'd called him her real family, and a woman whose smile was becoming harder to forget. The night on Catherine's patio had stayed with him. Her honesty, her vulnerability, the way her fingers slowly relaxed beneath his hand like a gate unlocking. He wasn't naive. He knew love, real love, didn't arrive in grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It arrived in quiet choices, in showing up, in waiting without pressure, in listening harder than you spoke. Jack wasn't used to sharing space with anyone's life anymore. But somehow Ella and cautiously, Catherine had made room for him, and he felt that space widening by the day. That evening, just as Jack was about to close the garage for the night, he heard the familiar purr of Catherine's SUV pulling into the gravel lot. He stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag, and raised an eyebrow as she opened the back door. Ella jumped out, first raincoat flapping, holding something large and flat wrapped in a garbage bag. We made something, she shouted, running toward him. Catherine followed more slowly, her eyes dancing between amusement and apprehension. Hi there, Jack said, crouching, as Ella skidded to a stop. She handed him the bag like it contained treasure. You have to open it now. Jack peeled back the plastic. It was a drawing. No, a painting done in thick brush strokes and bright, unapologetic color. It showed 3 figures standing in front of a red barn. One was tall with a gray beard and flannel shirt. One wore a white dress. Between them stood a little girl holding both their hands. Over the top in glittery pink letters, Ella had written, "Our home." Jack blinked. Catherine stood beside him now, arms crossed lightly as if trying to protect herself from her own emotions. She painted it at school. Catherine said the teacher gave them a project. "Where do you feel most safe?" Jack looked at Ella. "This is beautiful," she beamed. "It's going in your house." Jack laughed. "Well, I hope you don't mind a few oil stains. My walls aren't as fancy as yours." "It's okay," Ella said confidently. "Home isn't walls. It's people." Catherine sucked in a quiet breath, and Jack glanced at her. She was looking at Ella like she was seeing her for the first time. He gently touched the edge of the painting. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll hang it where everyone can see." Ella grinned, pleased. "I should have warned you," Catherine said, smiling faintly. "She's decided you're permanent." Jack stood and met her gaze. "I've decided the same." They didn't say more, but they didn't need to. Later that night, as thunder grumbled low in the hills, and Jack sipped a rare cup of tea in his quiet house, he hung the painting on the kitchen wall. It didn't match the decor, mostly metal signs and vintage calendars, but it changed the space. It gave it color. It gave it story. It gave it Ella. As he stood back and admired her brushstrokes, the wild blue sky, the sun with a smiling face, the crude but affectionate shapes, he felt something loosen inside him. Not grief, not guilt, but the quiet resignation of someone who'd finally stopped carrying the weight of loss alone. He texted Catherine, "Jack just hung the painting. It's perfect. Tell her I'm honored to be her home." The response came almost immediately, Catherine. She said, "Tell Uncle Jack he's not a maybe, he's a yes." "I think that goes for both of us." Jack stared at the message for a long time. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he walked back to the painting, leaned in close and whispered, "I'll be a yes for as long as you'll have me." And this time when he sat down at his kitchen table, it didn't feel quite so empty. It felt like waiting for something beautiful to grow. A cold snap settled over the town by the end of October. Trees, once dressed in blazing reds and golds, now stood bare against the gray sky. Leaves piled along sidewalks and fences like old memories waiting to be gathered. In Catherine's kitchen, the scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and baked apples filled the air. The oven ticked as it cooled, and outside, the first flurries of the season fell in soft spirals across the yard. Jack was due any minute. Ella was in her room humming as she arranged a tea party for Buttons the giraffe and a circle of assorted dolls. Catherine had baked the apple pie herself, not because Jack expected it, but because some part of her needed to do something with her hands, something warm and honest. There was something she needed to say tonight, and she wanted to say it right. When the doorbell rang, her hands were dusted in flour. She wiped them quickly on a towel and opened the door. Jack stood on the front steps, a light snow dusting his shoulders. He looked down at her with that quiet steadiness she'd come to recognize, not confident exactly, but present. "Grounded evening," he said. "You're right on time," she replied. Again, he held up a paper bag. Ella mentioned hot chocolate mix with the tiny marshmallows. Catherine smiled. "You just earned hero status." They ate in the cozy warmth of the breakfast nook, with Ella chattering about her art project, a papier-mâché turkey, the schoolbook fair, and her recent decision to marry her friend Leo because he says, "Excuse me," even when he burps. Jack laughed. Catherine nearly spit out her cider. After dinner, Ella yawned dramatically and announced she was very exhausted from managing so many animals and needed to sleep. Jack carried her to bed without hesitation, her arms around his neck, her cheek against his flannel shirt. Catherine stood in the hallway and watched. He tucked Ella in with gentle hands and sat beside her until her breathing evened out. Then he returned to the kitchen where Catherine stood pouring 2 cups of tea. "I added the marshmallows," she said, handing him his. He smiled. "Good call." They sat at the table, steam rising between them, the silence soft but charged. Outside, the snow came down a little thicker now, a hush falling over the world. "I've been meaning to tell you something," Catherine said, her voice quiet. Jack nodded. "Take your time." She looked down at her mug. "When I adopted Ella, I was broken. Not in a dramatic way, more like quietly dismantled, years of trying, failing. My marriage collapsing, I had my name, my money, and nothing else." Jack didn't interrupt. "She came into my life like a whisper," Catherine continued. No fanfare, just a tiny heartbeat handed to me in a hospital room, and I fell in love with her before she even opened her eyes. Her voice trembled just slightly. She saved me, she said. Jack's gaze didn't waver. And you saved her. I tried, I really did. And I've been terrified ever since that someone might come and say, you didn't earn this, she's not really yours. Jack reached across the table, gently placed his hand over hers. I'm not that someone, he said. She nodded, her fingers tightening around his. I know, but even knowing that the fear doesn't go away. That's how you know it matters, he said. Fear doesn't follow things that don't. Catherine looked up at him. I never thought I'd let anyone into this life I built. Not really, but somehow you're in it. And I'm not sure how it happened, Jack smiled, warm and quiet. Maybe you didn't build walls. Maybe you just built a door. And now it's open. She looked at him, then really looked, and in his eyes she didn't see the past. She saw something rooted in the now. In the way he listened, the way he waited without pressing, the way he always showed up. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to do this alone anymore. You don't have to, he said. The fire in the living room crackled softly, casting long, warm shadows across the floor. Jack stood and offered his hand. She took it. In the quiet living room, with the firelight flickering and the snow whispering outside the windows, they sat together on the couch. Not talking, not rushing, just being. Jack rested his arm along the back of the couch, and Catherine leaned into him, her head finding the curve of his shoulder. It wasn't a beginning wrapped in fireworks or declarations. It was something better. It was safe, it was steady, it was real. Later, after Jack had gone, Catherine peeked in on Ella. The little girl slept soundly, one hand curled around a crayon she'd refused to put away. Beside her on the nightstand sat a new picture drawn in marker and glitter. Of course, it showed 3 figures again, but this time they stood beneath a roof over the top Ella had written. We belong. Catherine smiled through tears, brushed her daughter's hair gently and whispered, Yes, sweetheart, we do. Snow had blanketed the town overnight. The world outside was quiet, wrapped in white, as if winter had gently whispered it into stillness. Jack's old truck rumbled carefully up Catherine's long driveway, its tires crunching over ice-crusted gravel. In the passenger seat sat a pie, a homemade pie. Well, mostly homemade. He'd cheated on the crust Catherine had warned him about store-bought, but he figured she'd forgive him once she saw the effort he put into the filling. When he rang the bell, Ella opened the door, bundled in a wool sweater 2 sizes too big. Did you bring the pie? She asked before hello. Jack held up the foil-wrapped treasure. Still warm, you may enter, she said solemnly. Stepping aside, Jack laughed and stepped inside the warmth of the house, embracing him. He stomped snow off his boots and set the pie on the counter. Catherine appeared from the hallway, wearing a soft green flannel shirt and jeans, her hair tucked behind her ears. Her face brightened at the sight of him, but there was something different about her tonight. Not hesitation, not caution. Ease. Looks like you braved the storm, she said. For this kitchen and this company, I'd walk here barefoot. Let's not test that, she replied, taking the pie and unwrapping it. She gave it a quick glance and smirked. Store-bought crust, Jack raised both hands. Guilty, she shook her head but smiled. Points for honesty. The 3 of them gathered in the kitchen, surrounded by the smells of cinnamon-roasted chicken and buttery biscuits. The fire in the living room cast a warm glow across the tile, and Ella danced between the table and the record player, demanding holiday music and singing along badly but enthusiastically. Your daughter has a future in entertainment, Jack said as he helped Catherine set the table. She has a future in volume, Catherine replied. He chuckled. She takes after you. Catherine glanced at him sideways. You think I'm loud, I think you're bold, he said. It was said lightly, but it hung in the air with meaning. Catherine didn't reply. She didn't need to. Dinner was loud, joyful, filled with laughter, second helpings, and Ella's insistence that her mashed potatoes looked like a unicorn horn. After dessert, they bundled up and stepped outside for 5 minutes of snowflake, catching Ella's idea, of course, before retreating back inside for warmth. Then came the dishes. Jack stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, while Catherine dried. Ella had been sent to the living room with a cup of cocoa and strict instructions not to bounce on the furniture. Jack handed her a plate and their fingers brushed. He paused. Catherine met his eyes. I forgot what this feels like, she said softly. What this? A kitchen full of noise. The clatter of forks. The warmth. Like we've done this 100 times before. Jack nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. They worked in silence for a while, moving in sync. When the final pan was rinsed and the sink wiped down, Catherine turned off the light. Jack followed her into the living room. Ella was curled under a fleece blanket, eyes fluttering her half-drunk cocoa cooling on the end table. I'll carry her, Jack whispered. Carefully, he lifted her. She didn't wake, just curled instinctively against his chest, sighing into his collar. Catherine led the way upstairs. Jack placed Ella gently into bed, tucking the blanket around her. He paused to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. Catherine stood in the doorway watching. When they returned downstairs, the quiet settled deeper. More intimate, Catherine poured 2 small glasses of cider and joined Jack on the couch. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows on the walls. They sat close but not pressed together. Just enough, Catherine spoke first. She called you Dad yesterday. Jack turned. Did she? Catherine nodded. Just once, she was coloring and said, Dad would like this one. Then she looked up a little startled, like it had surprised her too. She didn't correct herself. Jack let out a slow breath. That's a big word. She didn't mean it like a label, Catherine said. She meant it like a feeling. Jack stared into the fire. I never thought I'd hear it again. She didn't plan it, Catherine said. That's what makes it real. They were quiet again, then Jack turned toward her. You've made a home here, he said. One with love in the walls. I'm honored just to be invited in. Catherine smiled small, tired but full of truth. You never needed an invitation. She rested her head against his shoulder. Jack didn't move. He simply stayed there warm beside her. A quiet presence that didn't press or rush or expect. Outside, snow fell steadily. The wind hummed against the windows, but inside there was only stillness and breath and the soft shared comfort of people learning how to belong. And when Catherine finally closed her eyes, it wasn't from exhaustion, it was from peace. Spring arrived early that year. Not the calendar spring, the kind that tiptoes in with shy sunlight and timid blossoms, but a deeper kind. The kind that lives in people, not just trees. A quiet thaw, a slow, beautiful beginning again. Jack stood outside Catherine's house, tying the last of the wind chimes Ella had made to a branch near the porch. It was lopsided, painted in wild streaks of green and pink, with beads dangling from bent wire. But it caught the breeze and sang like joy itself. Behind him, laughter floated from the kitchen window. Catherine's voice, Ella's squeals, a dog barking. Yes, a dog. Ella's 7th birthday wish had come true. His name was Marvin. He drooled. Jack smiled. He'd started coming over more often after that snowy dinner months ago. Then weekends turned into weekdays. Weekdays turned into mornings. And mornings turned into staying. One drawer, then a toolbox in the garage, then someday soon more. They hadn't rushed. It wasn't a whirlwind. It was a sunrise, slow, certain, full of light. Inside, Catherine poured lemonade into tall glasses as Ella set the table on the back deck with exaggerated ceremony. This is a celebratory brunch, the girl declared, placing mismatched napkins with theatrical flair. Because Mommy said we have news. Jack stepped through the sliding door just in time to catch that last part. Oh, he said, raising an eyebrow at Catherine. She blushed slightly. I may have mentioned we were thinking of making things more official. Ella's eyes lit up. Like wedding official, Catherine laughed. More like family official. Jack knelt beside Ella. You know you already made me part of this family the first time you drew me in one of your pictures. Ella leaned in and whispered, that one's still on the fridge. The dog licked it, but it's fine. Jack chuckled. Perfect. They sat at the table, the 3 of them under a blooming dogwood tree, a vase of wildflowers, plates of eggs and toast, the scent of earth and sunshine, and something simple, clean, and whole. After they ate, Ella ran off with Marvin and Jack helped clear the plates. Catherine leaned against the doorframe watching him. You're happy, she said. Jack nodded. I am. Do you ever think about her every day? He replied without hesitation. But now I think about her with gratitude. She gave me a reason to keep going, and then she gave me. Ella. Catherine stepped closer, and Ella brought you back to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, delicate, Lila's ring. Only this time it sat inside a wooden box lined with soft velvet. Jack had cleaned it, polished it, but he hadn't changed it. Some things didn't need changing. He held it out. Catherine stared at it, breath catching. It's not a proposal, he said gently. Not yet. It's a promise that no matter where this goes, no matter what name I do or don't wear, I'll be here, I'll show up. Every morning, every mess, every moment. Catherine touched the ring, eyes glistening. I don't need a diamond, she whispered. Just you. He closed the box and placed it in her hand. Then that's what you'll have. They didn't kiss. Not right then. They just stood in the warmth of a spring morning, with promises made quietly like seeds planted in rich soil. That night, Jack sat on the porch swing, Ella curled up beside him in pajamas, her head resting against his arm. Tell me again about Mommy Lila, she said. Jack smiled. She loved apple pie and old jazz records. She used to dance in the kitchen barefoot, even when the floor was cold. Was she brave? She was the bravest person I've ever known. Was she sad when she had to go? Jack thought for a moment. I think she was sad to leave. But I also think she knew something beautiful was waiting behind her. Me, you, Jack said. And your mom, and this dog that drools on everything. Ella giggled. Jack looked out across the yard where fairy lights glowed along the fence, and the wind chime sang its lopsided little tune. Life had twisted in ways he couldn't have predicted. He'd lost. He'd grieved. He'd stood in the ruins of everything he thought would last, but love, true love, hadn't ended. It had shifted, grown roots in new soil, taken new shape. It had walked back into his life, not with fanfare, but with a little girl in a white dress and a silver ring too small for her hand. And now here they were, not perfect, but whole. Inside, Catherine set the dinner plates in the sink and watched them from the window. Jack and Ella on the swing heads together. The kind of picture you couldn't pose. She closed her eyes for a moment and gave thanks not just for what she had, but for what she'd almost missed. Then she turned off the light, letting the quiet hold them all. Because some stories don't end with happily ever after. Some stories begin again and again, with kindness, with second chances. With the kind of love that doesn't always announce itself, it just stays. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of this story stayed with you the most? Your thoughts, memories, and reflections mean so much to us and to others in this community. If this story touched your heart and you'd like to hear more stories like it, filled with hope, kindness, and second chances, please consider subscribing to our channel. It's the best way to stay connected and support what we do. Thank you for watching and for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself and each other.